Ethan Collins gazed at the shimmering blue water of his backyard pool, feeling the tension of the past months melt away. After years of renting cramped apartments, he finally owned a home. A home with space. A home with privacy. And most of all, a home with that glorious pool, the prize he'd dreamed about through endless late nights at the office. It was nearly dusk. The sky washed in warm shades of amber and violet. He stepped onto the deck, the wood pleasantly cool beneath his bare feet, and dove cleanly into the water. The splash echoed softly, muffled by the thick fences and hedges that wrapped his yard. Ethan swam slowly, savoring the moment. The world, beyond the fence, felt far away, but it wasn't. Behind one of the fences, a curtain twitched. A light flickered off in a house just beyond the hedge. Ethan surfaced, wiping water from his face. A strange chill crept down his spine, that odd sense of being watched. He scanned the fence line but saw nothing. He shook his head, laughed at himself, and kept swimming until the stars blinked awake above him. The next morning, a folded paper was wedged into his front door. No envelope, no letterhead, just a few terse words, printed in bold block letters. Please respect community peace. Pool use after dark is disruptive. No name, no signature. Ethan read it twice, irritation bubbling beneath his skin. He checked the HOA rules binder he'd been given at closing. No mention of pool hours, no restriction on backyard recreation after dark, so long as city noise ordinances were observed. He hadn't blasted music. He hadn't thrown a party. He'd swum, quietly, shrugging it off. He tore up the note and dropped it in the trash. But, that evening, as the sun slipped behind the rooftops, he felt the unease return. He hadn't planned to swim, not tonight. But now, part of him wanted to prove that this was his space, his home. So just after dusk, he stepped into the yard again. The water gleamed like liquid silver. He eased in, letting the coolness embrace him. He swam slow, deliberate laps. No music, no splashing, just him and the water. Minutes passed, and then, a faint sound. He paused, ears straining. Was that footsteps? A scuffle near the side gate. He swam to the edge and climbed out quietly, grabbing a towel. The yard was empty. The gate was closed. But that feeling of being watched had returned, stronger now. The next morning, another note. Consider your neighbors. Late swims will not be tolerated. Still unsigned. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. There was nothing in the rules. Nothing illegal about what he was doing. But someone, maybe more than one, had decided to make his pool their business. That night, curiosity overpowered caution. After locking up, he stepped onto the back deck and waited in the shadows. The air was thick with summer heat, the pool silent, undisturbed. And then he saw it, a figure, lurking at the far end of his fence. Motionless, watching. Ethan's heart pounded. He reached for his phone, but by the time he unlocked the screen, the figure slipped away, melting into the darkness between houses. His peaceful pool had become a battleground, and Ethan realized this was just the beginning. The next morning, Ethan paced his kitchen, coffee growing cold on the counter. The image of that figure by his fence wouldn't leave his mind. He hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there watching him, but why? Was it curiosity, nosiness, or something worse? Determined not to let paranoia take root, he decided to handle it the logical way. He checked the perimeter in daylight. His fence was intact, the gate still latched, but as he rounded the far side, his eyes narrowed. Fresh footprints, faint, but clear enough in the dew-darkened grass, led from the alley behind his property to the spot where the watcher had stood. Unbelievable, he muttered. That afternoon, while working from his home office, Ethan caught movement on his security app. A new camera he'd installed above the back door had picked up activity. He tapped the screen. There, across the street, was a woman in a bright floral blouse, standing on the curb, phone pointed toward his yard. Filming, taking photos. Ethan stepped outside. Can I help you? The woman startled, then offered a tight smile. Oh, just admiring your garden. Lovely roses. The roses were on the opposite side of the house. She turned on her heel and hurried away. Later, as dusk approached, Ethan debated skipping his swim. But he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. If anything, he was more resolved than ever. He kept it brief, a few quiet laps. The stillness of the night was broken only by the soft splash of water when he climbed out. He noticed something new. A security camera mounted on the neighbor's garage, angled directly at his pool. That camera hadn't been there before. The next morning, Ethan opened his mailbox to find an official-looking letter, this time, HOA letterhead. Crisp and impersonal. Mr. Collins, we have received multiple concerns regarding your backyard pool usage during evening hours. While the community covenants do not specify pool times, the HOA strongly recommends restricting usage to daylight hours to preserve neighborhood harmony. Strongly recommends. The words dripped with threat, dressed up as politeness. He scanned the letter again. No rule cited. No bylaw referenced. Just veiled pressure. Ethan's jaw clenched. He pulled up the HOA rules again, reading line by line. No mention of pools beyond basic safety requirements. No curfews. Nothing that gave them authority to dictate how and when he could enjoy his property, but it was clear now. They weren't going to stop. That evening, his phone buzzed with a neighborhood app notification. A post titled "Keeping Our Neighborhood Peaceful" had gone up, complete with vague complaints about certain homeowners disregarding community values. The author, Marjorie Clark, HOA president. Comments piled up. Most were neutral, but a few echoed her sentiment. We moved here for quiet. It's not hard to be considerate. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. He hadn't disturbed anyone. This wasn't about noise, it was about control. As night fell, he sat on his deck in the dark, watching the quiet street. He wondered who would show up next. A neighbor peeking through blinds. A stranger skulking in shadows. Somewhere beyond the fences, he knew Marjorie, and her allies were watching. And Ethan realized something else. Something that made his pulse quicken with both anger and determination. They had underestimated him. The envelope was thicker this time. Delivered not by mail but hand-placed on his porch. The paper crisp and formal. Ethan tore it open. His fingers tight with frustration. Notice of special HOA meeting. Emergency session to address disruptive pool use and community disturbance. Attendance required. The date, 2 days away. The location, the community clubhouse. Ethan stared at the letter, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. So this was how they wanted to play it. Corner him at a meeting where Marjorie could rally her allies and paint him as the villain. The following evening, as Ethan sat quietly on his deck, the neighborhood seemed unusually still. He felt the weight of eyes on him, the sense of whispers just out of earshot. Across the street, porch lights flicked on, then off. Shadows moved behind blinds. When the night deepened and he finally went inside, Ethan checked his cameras. At 10 p.m., one caught something chilling. A figure walking along his fence line. Shining a small flashlight through the slats, he rewound and froze the frame. It was grainy, but he could make out enough. A short, stocky build. Could it have been Marjorie, or one of her supporters? At the clubhouse meeting, the air was thick with anticipation. More people showed up than Ethan expected, faces he barely recognized, neighbors who rarely left polite waves or nods. Marjorie sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She opened the meeting with a practiced smile. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss a matter that's affecting the peace and well-being of our community. Ethan raised an eyebrow. There was no mention of him by name yet, but everyone knew why they were there. Marjorie continued, her voice syrupy sweet. We've had numerous concerns about pool use late into the evening hours. Concerns about noise, safety, and the example it sets. We're a community that values harmony. Murmurs spread around the room. A few heads nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stood. I'd like to ask, who exactly has made these complaints? And what specific rule am I violating? Marjorie's smile faltered for a flicker of a second. Well, Ethan, the board is privy to concerns that are shared confidentially. It's not about one rule, it's about the spirit of the community. Ethan let the silence stretch. So, no rule. Just feelings. A few neighbors exchanged glances. One elderly man in the back coughed awkwardly. Marjorie pressed on. The board proposes adopting a new guideline. Pool use should be limited to between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. This ensures quiet evenings for all. Ethan crossed his arms. Guideline or rule? Marjorie's eyes glinted. If the board approves it, it can become enforceable policy. Ethan shook his head slowly, the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't about his pool at all. Marjorie thrived on control. This was just the latest target. I won't agree to that, Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. You have no legal authority over private property hours without a proper vote from the homeowners. You know that. The room tensed. Marjorie's expression hardened, her mask slipping for just a moment. "We'll see about that," she said, quietly. That night, as Ethan left the clubhouse, he knew the battle lines were drawn. But what Marjorie didn't realize was that he wasn't going to be easy prey. Ethan barely slept that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, playing the meeting over in his head, the smug look on Marjorie's face, the way the crowd shifted uncomfortably under her manufactured charm. It wasn't just about the pool. That much was clear. She wanted control, and he had refused to bend. By morning, his irritation had hardened into resolve. If Marjorie wanted a battle, she'd get one, but on his terms. He poured himself a mug of coffee and sat down at his laptop. First, he pulled up the HOA bylaws again. Line by line, he read through them, searching for any clause that could justify the so-called pool hour policy. Nothing. The covenants governed fence height, landscaping standards, paint colors, but not private pool, use hours. Next, Ethan started digging into Marjorie herself. A few keyword searches led him to old community newsletters, archived on the HOA's forgotten web pages. A pattern began to emerge, small, but telling. There was the story of a neighbor 2 blocks over, who'd built a pergola in his backyard, forced to tear it down after. Marjorie cited a violation she herself had drafted into the rules. Another case of a young couple who'd installed solar panels and were slapped with fines until they sold and moved. Ethan leaned back, whistling low. Marjorie had been running the HOA like her personal kingdom for years, and no one had dared stand up to her. But there was more. In the HOA's annual meeting minutes, Ethan found something odd. Fines collected thousands of dollars worth, with no clear accounting of where the money had gone. Maintenance fund, the notes claimed, but no major repairs had been done in years. A thought struck him. What if Marjorie's obsession with control wasn't just about power? What if there was money involved? As the day wore on, Ethan made phone calls, quietly reaching out to neighbors, people he barely knew until now. His first few attempts met polite indifference or wary hesitation. But by the 5th call, something shifted. A woman named Karen, on the next street over, spoke in a low, cautious voice. "I've had my run-ins with Marjorie. She'll fine me for putting up string lights on my porch, said they didn't match community aesthetics. I paid just to make her go away. She preys on people who won't fight back." Encouraged, Ethan knocked on a few doors that evening, listening as one story after another tumbled out. A shed someone was forced to tear down. A garden bed removed, under threat of daily penalties. Marjorie had made life miserable for countless residents, and no one had dared unite against her until now. That night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, scribbling notes. A plan was forming. He'd gather proof, real proof. He'd document every intimidation, every overreach. And then, when the time was right, he'd bring it all into the open where Marjorie couldn't hide behind charm and technicalities. But, as he turned off the lights and prepared for bed, he spotted something that made his skin crawl. His pool gate, locked tight when he'd come inside, was now standing ajar, swaying gently in the night breeze. Someone had been inside his yard. Again, this wasn't just a battle of words anymore. The game had escalated, and Ethan was ready. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. The image of the swaying gate haunted him. Someone had crossed the line, literally, and the stakes were no longer just about rules and fines. They were about his safety. He woke before dawn, made a strong pot of coffee, and started making a list. If Marjorie wanted this fight, she wouldn't be facing him alone. The first call he made was to Karen, the neighbor who'd shared her own run-in with Marjorie. She answered on the first ring. "Karen, I think it's time we stop letting Marjorie bully us in the dark. I'm putting together proof of her harassment. Would you be willing to help?" There was a pause. Then, "I've been waiting for someone to say that for years." By noon, Ethan had quietly contacted half a dozen neighbors. He didn't ask for much, just their stories, any photos of letters or fines, anything that documented Marjorie's pattern of intimidation. To his surprise, people were eager to talk. It was as if the neighborhood had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to stand up. A man named Victor, who lived around the corner, shared how Marjorie fined him over improperly stored trash bins that had been behind his fence, out of sight. A young couple revealed how she'd threatened them with daily penalties for having a small inflatable kiddie pool, claiming it was a permanent structure not approved by the HOA. As the stories poured in, Ethan organized them meticulously. Timelines, copies of letters, even screenshots of Marjorie's passive-aggressive posts on the neighborhood app. He created a file and backed it up twice, once to a USB drive, once to the cloud. But Marjorie wasn't about to go quietly. That evening, as Ethan stepped out to water his garden, he spotted Marjorie herself standing at the edge of the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Evening, Ethan. Lovely night, isn't it?" He kept his tone polite. "It is. Anything I can help you with?" "Oh no," she said sweetly. "Just making sure everything's in order. After all, we wouldn't want another complaint, would we?" Her words dripped with false concern. Ethan forced a smile and went back to his hose, but inside he was seething. The next day, another letter arrived, this one citing him for unsightly pool accessories. The accessory in question: a single blue pool noodle resting on a lounge chair. It was laughable. But Ethan knew what she was doing, trying to drown him in paper and penalties until he gave up or moved away. But Ethan was done playing defense. That night, he met quietly with Karen and Victor in Karen's backyard. Together, they started drafting a petition, not just against Marjorie's proposed pool restrictions, but for a formal review of her conduct as HOA president. She counts on people being too afraid or too busy to fight back. Ethan said, voice low, "But if we stand together, she can't silence all of us." Victor nodded. "It's time." As they planned, Ethan's phone buzzed with a security alert. He checked the feed and felt a cold fury settle over him. There was Marjorie again on the public sidewalk this time, but filming his house. Slowly, deliberately, like she was cataloging his every move. The game had escalated. But Ethan wasn't backing down. The next move would be his, and it would be one Marjorie never saw coming. The petition gained signatures faster than Ethan expected. Within 2 days, nearly 20 households had quietly joined the cause. Some neighbors signed with visible relief, others with defiance, and a few with nervous glances over their shoulders, as if Marjorie might materialize from the hedges to punish them on the spot. Ethan and his small team kept their efforts discreet. Karen typed up the petition formally, citing specific instances of overreach, including the baseless fines and intimidation tactics. Victor compiled a packet of evidence, photographs, letters, and notes from residents documenting abuses of power. "We'll present it at the next board meeting," Ethan said, tapping the folder. No shouting matches, just facts. But Marjorie was already sensing the shift. The very next morning, new signs appeared at the entrance to the neighborhood, small, tasteful, but unmistakable in their message. "Preserve the harmony, support our HOA leadership." Ethan smirked when he saw them. She was scared. The subtle battle for hearts and minds continued. On the neighborhood app, Marjorie posted a long message about the challenges of leadership and how true community spirit means respecting those who work tirelessly to protect our shared values. Comments trickled in, a few supportive but many neutral or questioning. One brave neighbor even replied, "Protecting values shouldn't mean targeting residents." The following weekend, Ethan organized what he dubbed a poolside coffee, an informal gathering at his place. No official agenda, no speeches, just neighbors, coffee, and pastries by the pool. To his surprise, people came, a dozen at first, then more families with kids, older couples, even the new tenants who'd been keeping to themselves. They talked about gardens, pets, school, and slowly, cautiously, about Marjorie. "She'll find me for having a flagpole," one man confessed, shaking his head. "I paid a $200 penalty for unapproved wind chimes," a woman added by the end of the morning. The group wasn't just sharing coffee, they were sharing resolve. But Marjorie wasn't done fighting. That evening, Ethan received another letter slid under his door. Final notice, continued violations regarding pool use and accessories will result in referral to HOA legal counsel for enforcement action. It was laughable, no rule cited, no bylaw referenced, just vague threats dressed up in official-sounding language. Ethan scanned it and added it to the growing file. What Marjorie didn't realize was that Ethan had already consulted his own legal expert, a friend who specialized in property law. The advice had been clear, as long as no actual covenant was being broken. The HOA had no teeth. That night, Ethan drafted an email to the entire HOA mailing list, attaching the petition and the evidence. His words were measured but firm. "This isn't about a pool. This is about fairness, transparency, and respect. Please read, and if you agree, add your name. Together, we can ensure our HOA serves us all, not just a few." He hesitated for only a moment before hitting send. Within minutes, replies started flooding in. "Thank you for doing this. Count me in." I thought I was the only one she targeted. By midnight, Ethan sat on his porch, looking out over the darkened street. He could almost feel the shift in the air, as if the neighborhood was waking up from a long, quiet nightmare. Marjorie had spent years ruling through fear, but now, for the first time, the community was no longer afraid, and the showdown was coming. The night of the HOA board meeting arrived, thick with tension. The community clubhouse, usually sparsely attended during these sessions, was packed. Chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors filled every seat, and more stood along the back walk. The air felt heavy, as if the entire neighborhood had come to bear witness to a long overdue reckoning. Ethan entered with his folder of evidence, tucked under his arm. He nodded to Karen, Victor, and a handful of others who'd been part of his quiet campaign. They nodded back. Their faces resolute. At the head of the table sat Marjorie, as composed as ever. She wore a tailored blazer and that same tight-lipped smile she always seemed to summon when she felt challenged. "Let's come to order," she said, her voice overly cheerful. "Thank you all for joining us to discuss important matters of community harmony." Ethan took a seat near the front, his heart steady. He wasn't here to disrupt, he was here to expose. Marjorie wasted no time. She launched into a speech about maintaining the aesthetic integrity and peace of the neighborhood, and how some recent activities have threatened that balance. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan, but she never said his name. When she finished, she opened the floor with a reminder that comments should remain respectful and focused on solutions. Ethan stood. His voice was calm but carried to every corner of the room. "I appreciate the chance to speak. I think we all agree that a neighborhood should feel like a community, not a place where people live in fear of fines or intimidation." There was a ripple of reaction. A few people nodded. A murmur rose in the back. Ethan continued, holding up the thick packet. "Over the past weeks, I've gathered documentation, letters, fines, complaints from many of you. Together, these paint a clear picture of overreach and abuse of power by our HOA leadership. I'm here tonight not to point fingers, but to ask for accountability." Marjorie's smile thinned. "Ethan, if you have concerns, they should be submitted formally through the appropriate channels." "I am," Ethan replied, unwavering. He handed copies of the packet to the other board members. "These are formal concerns, and I'd like the board and community to review them." He stepped aside, letting the documents speak for themselves. The pages contained copies of arbitrary fines, threatening letters, and notes from neighbors who'd been targeted. The most damning piece, a record of fines collected over the years with no clear explanation of where the money had gone. The room fell silent as the board members flipped through the pages. Marjorie's confident posture stiffened. She glanced at the documents, then at the growing unease in the crowd. "Folks," she began, voice tight, "I think we're letting personal grievances cloud the larger picture of community unity." But the tide had turned. A neighbor near the back spoke up. "No, Marjorie. This isn't about unity, it's about fairness. I've kept quiet for years. But I paid $300 for a so-called unauthorized planter box. And I was too scared to fight back." Another voice, "She'll fine me for my mailbox color," said it wasn't on the approved list, but I checked later, and it was. One by one, voices joined in. The room buzzed with pent-up frustration, finally finding release. Marjorie tried to regain control, tapping her gavel, but the board members exchanged glances. One of them, a man who'd sat silent through most meetings, finally spoke. "I move that we table all new policies and open a formal review of the HOA's enforcement actions over the past 5 years." The crowd broke into applause. Ethan sat down, exhaling slowly. The battle wasn't over, but the walls Marjorie had built around herself were starting to crumble. The days following the board meeting felt like a storm breaking over the neighborhood. For the first time in years, residents walked their dogs, trimmed their hedges, or simply waved to each other without the weight of Marjorie's scrutiny hanging over them. But behind the scenes, the board's review committee formed that very night was hard at work. Ethan stayed out of the spotlight, trusting that the evidence he'd provided would speak louder than any speech he could make. Weeks passed, and whispers spread. "She's been diverting funds for consulting fees that no one approved. There's no record of where the fine money went after it was collected. The treasurer didn't even know the account existed. She tried to fine someone last week for putting out Halloween decorations. Can you believe it?" In October, at the next board meeting, the clubhouse was packed again. This time, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Marjorie entered with her usual poise. but her eyes darted nervously toward the board members, who sat stony-faced with folders in front of them. The chair of the review committee cleared his throat. After a thorough investigation, we've discovered numerous procedural violations and unauthorized financial actions by our HOA president. His voice was steady, but the words hit like thunder. Effective immediately, the board votes to remove Marjorie Walters from her position. A collective gasp filled the room. Marjorie's face paled. She stood, opening her mouth to argue, but the board chair held up a hand. This decision is final, and we'll be conducting a full audit of all transactions during your tenure. We've also voted to freeze the fine account until the audit concludes. Marjorie stared at them, her composure unraveling. You're all making a huge mistake. I've done nothing but serve this community. But no one came to her defense. The room was silent but for the soft shuffle of papers as the board moved on to the next agenda item. As if the Queen had already been forgotten. Outside, after the meeting, neighbors gathered in small groups. The tension finally giving way to relief, and, for some, laughter. Ethan stood quietly near the clubhouse door, watching as people shook hands, shared stories, and talked about the future. Karen and Victor joined him. You did it, Karen said, grinning. You stood up, and we all stood with you. It wasn't just me, Ethan said. Marjorie built that house of cards herself. We just stopped letting her hide it. Victor clapped him on the back. So, about that pool party you promised us when this was over. Ethan chuckled. You're all invited. No schedule, no restrictions. Just neighbors enjoying themselves the way it should have been all along. The following weekend, Ethan's yard was filled with laughter and the splash of water as kids played and adults relaxed. The air smelled of barbecue and fresh-cut grass. For the first time in a long while, the pool wasn't a battleground, but as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Ethan caught sight of a moving van at the far end of the street. Marjorie, hair tied back and face tight with frustration, was supervising as boxes were loaded into the truck. He watched for a moment, then turned away. The neighborhood wasn't hers anymore. Later that evening, as the last guests trickled home, Ethan sat by the pool, the surface of the water reflecting the stars. Peace had returned, not because of new rules, but because the community had finally found its voice, and this time it wouldn't be silenced.